Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's live broadcast, Health Equity, Clinical Development's Future Framework. I'm Fran Polaro, Senior Editor of Pharmaceutical Executive, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. We're pleased to bring you this webcast presented by Pharmaceutical Executive and sponsored by Komodo Health. I'd like to share a statement from our sponsor. At Komodo Health, we combine the world's most comprehensive view of patient encounters with innovative algorithms and decades of clinical expertise to power our healthcare map, the industry's most precise view of the U.S. healthcare system. A few important announcements before we begin. This webcast is designed to be interactive, and we encourage you to ask questions during the event. The Q&A box is located below the media player, so you can enlarge the slide window by clicking the icon at the bottom right of the screen, and the help widget is now located at the top right of the screen. The slides will advance automatically during the event. If you have any technical problems viewing or hearing this presentation, please click the question mark help widget in the dock at the bottom of your presentation window. I'd now like to introduce today's speakers. We're pleased to be joined today by Kwame Marfo and Angie Davis. Kwame is the Market Strategy and Innovation Lead for Clinical Development at Komodo Health. He has 15 plus years of experience in the healthcare industry, working in strategy and operations leadership roles across manufacturing, technical operations, commercial, and R&D. Prior to Komodo, Kwame served as Director of Insights and Analytics for Roche Genentech's Global Clinical Operations. Kwame graduated with a BS in Chemical Engineering from Stanford University and an MBA in Corporate Strategy and Market Analysis from the University of California, Berkeley. Angie is an advocate at heart. It all started with a trip to DC for Call on Congress in 2009. A fire was lit, and Angie joined Fight Colorectal Cancer in 2011 as the first Director of Community Engagement. In 2015, she accepted the role of President. Under her leadership, Fight CRC grew 30% year over year from 2011 to 2019. Today, the organization continues to relentlessly pursue its mission, which is leading to growth in both budget and impact. Thousands of advocates are now involved at Fight Colorectal Cancer, and millions upon millions of people have been reached by her work. Thank you for joining us today. Let's get started.
Fantastic. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you all for joining us today. Really looking forward to this conversation with you all, primarily focusing on health equity, definitely within the public consciousness now, and really looking through how we can bring this through clinical development now and today. And the way we wanted to do this is to actually run through an actual example. And I'm really excited to have Angie here with us today from Fight CRC to really focus and talk about how this is happening within colorectal cancer specifically. So she's definitely going to set the stage there. And then we're going to talk through some of the real-world data applications that can also feed into health equity strategies within clinical development. And then again, bringing it to life with an actual example where we've modeled and showed how the applications and software solutions that are available today that leverage real-world data can actually be applied to an actual clinical trial. So we've modeled this for an existing clinical trial within colorectal cancer to bring some of this to life. So with that, I will pass it over to Angie to talk about Fight CRC and kind of set the stage within colorectal cancer. Angie?
Great. Thank you for having me. Very excited to be here. Fight Colorectal Cancer has been in existence since 2006, and we were founded by Nancy Roach, who is really a research advocate at heart. I think what we have really focused on is how do we bring that patient voice to the clinical trial development process. And the way we've done it is what we affectionately call our RATS program. So we train research advocates, research advocacy training and support, and we call them RATS. And we go through a curriculum where we prepare them to be a part of this process. And I think what's really important is we talk today about health equity, about health disparities, about how we can integrate the patient's voice, is that when you're diagnosed with cancer, colorectal cancer, breast cancer, lung cancer, whatever disease it may be, you don't get an immediate PhD in clinical trial design. So what we've done is we provided a program for patients who are passionate about this and who want to dedicate the time to go through a curriculum to figure out how can they provide insight into the trial design process in a meaningful way. So we go over biology, we go over design, we go over epidemiology, and we go over the guidelines for a disease, for colorectal cancer with our patients, which is an effort that we've been doing for the last decade. As it relates to clinical trial engagement, what we've seen, and I think that all of us on the call can agree, and is that we've struggled to see representation on clinical trials. And it's not without effort. It's really something that I know that we're all committed to, but we could be better at it, and we continue to strive to be better at it. And this is what's so exciting about the call today, or the webinar today, is I've been really excited to hear about these strategies. But our clinical trials and research advocacy effort really focuses on how can we train and seek patients and caregivers that represent diverse parts of our community. So how can we make sure that we're representing everyone and that everyone is able to participate? So we really invest in that. We make sure that we have a cohort of patient advocates that are representative of multiple communities and age, race, stage of disease, geography. All those things are so incredibly important, because we do see that the numbers are just challengingly low as it relates to representation on clinical trials. So we believe that one of the first steps you can take is including patient voices early on in your development process. And in the end, we hope that that is reflected in the accrual to clinical trial.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Angie. So now I'll talk about a little bit about Komodo Health. And then we'll kind of also set the stage about real-world data in this space and how real-world data can begin to influence some of the health equity strategies in partnership with sponsors within the industry, and then also in partnership with patient advocacy groups such as Fight CRC. So for Komodo Health, our mission is to reduce the burden of disease. And the way we do this is by building software solutions that connect siloed data across from multiple sources to actually create meaningful insights. So definitely need the data, and the data is extremely important, but we believe it's about actually creating meaningful insights that can actually drive for lasting impact for patients. And hopefully through this conversation, you'll see how we can enable that in partnership with you all. So healthcare data. You probably all have experienced this in some fashion, some form, but healthcare data is extremely hard to piece together. Depending on the data sources that you may have access to internally or even through some external partnerships, you may have some signals of the first sign of a health issue, and then what might be some sort of a second line or even third line therapy to address that health issue. And that there's a better story that can connect the sequence of events that a patient is actually experiencing as they're going through the healthcare system. And a lot of this is because of the fact that a lot of the data is siloed. So it's been a challenge throughout the industry for a while, but we're now living in a world where we're able to address this. Now, specifically within the clinical development domain, we actually see this fairly amplified. So clinical trials are the gold standard. The randomized clinical trials are the gold standard here that have led to so much innovation and breakthrough. Several of us have benefited from all of the research that has led to so many new drugs coming to market. But the reality is, if you look underneath the hood, a lot of that data is siloed. It's not actively connected with historical data, concurrent data, or even data post of after a specific clinical trial. And because of that, there's an opportunity to maybe miss some things, or an opportunity to allow for richer insights if this data was connected. But that's the legacy world we've been living in, and that's led to some of the challenges of actually enabling some additional success in the space. But as I've alluded to, we now live in a world where we can actually connect this data and connect it in a privacy preserving way, which is very key. And this is exactly what Komodo Health has done, to the tune of over 330 million patient lives across the United States, and then gone through the step of building software solutions on top of that connected real data to deliver value to patient advocacy groups and to sponsors to ultimately drive towards our mission of reducing the burden of disease. And through that, as you can imagine, there's just richer insights we can enable for all patients. And again, this is for all patients because we've basically gone through the effort of connecting data from multiple sources to get the most comprehensive view of the healthcare system as patients are navigating this and indexing on that patient journey. So living in a world now where we're able to connect that historical data, that clinical trial data, concurrent data that's maybe being collected as patients are going through a clinical trial, and then even more importantly, after that specific clinical trial, connecting that data all in a privacy preserving, secure way to surface additional insights. So based upon that, we want to jump into some use cases now. And the way we went about this is we actually, again, went to clinicaltrials.gov, search for colorectal cancer trial that is actively recruiting right now. And we look to see how we could apply some health equity strategies to influence that trial, assuming we were the sponsor. And we'll walk through some of those use cases and provide some context on how to approach this from a real world data perspective, and then also how to partner with patient advocacy groups to also enable much more in this space. So the first use case here is around modeling the impact of inclusion exclusion criteria. And as you can imagine, this is very key to define the target patient population for a specific drug. A lot of this is definitely driven by the science, the mechanism of action of a particular therapy, and the target line within which that therapy is going after. So fully appreciating the scientific context and maybe restrictions around that. But there's an opportunity to actually begin to model what the impact of different inclusion exclusion criteria might be on that target patient population. And even though that may not necessarily lead to a direct change of an inclusion exclusion criteria, it can, but at least sponsors, companies who are looking to execute these clinical trials will then be better informed about some of the risks and challenges to address head on to enable that trial to be successful. So here's an example of what we did. Again, we went to clinicaltrials.gov. We pulled a colorectal cancer study, and then we looked at the inclusion exclusion criteria and leveraged one of our products to actually create a cohort that is representative, as closely representative as possible to that trial's inclusion exclusion criteria. And we saw strategically how each inclusion exclusion criteria impacted that available population of patients who've been diagnosed with metastatic colorectal cancer. What we notice is that relative to the total population of patients diagnosed with metastatic colorectal cancer, there's a 69% reduction relative to that top line value versus the cohort of interest. 69% reduction in the available Black Americans in that final cohort, as opposed to a 63% reduction in the white American community. So again, out the gate, this can begin to inform whether there are specific inclusion criteria that a company might want to further interrogate, but at least setting them up for success out the gate to understand what the challenges might be specifically for recruiting a population that is disproportionately impacted by that specific disease. And the last point here too is we actually sequentially looked at each inclusion exclusion criteria. We determined that, at least for the way this cohort was designed, there was definitely one criteria that really drove a lot of that differentiation, and it was related to the brain mets criteria, where we saw the most disparity between the African American Black population versus the white American population within that specific cohort. So again, companies better informed to decide as to whether they can proceed with that inclusion exclusion criteria, or if there's an opportunity to switch it out, to change it, and if not, understand how to move forward to enable the trial to be successful in light of that. Angie, I'd love to get your thoughts as well in this area as far as patient advocacy support in trial design and potentially even understanding some of the implications of this.
I mean, I think this is incredible. I think when I first saw this and we were talking about this, I was just so impressed with the amount of data that Komodo can pull. I think from a patient advocacy standpoint, and for those partnering with patient advocacy organizations, this is incredibly empowering. Being able to work with your partners and show this data to your partners, I think empowers the advocacy organization to better focus its resources, better understand where those target populations are at and how they can help you accrue to a clinical trial. I know in the case of Fight Colorectal Cancer, we've been able to take data and include a clinical trial finder, a provider finder, and look at geography and help patients find sites for clinical trials. But we've never been able to do this as an organization, really look at race and ethnicity as it relates to what a geography's catchment area looks like. And so I think it's pretty amazing, honestly, for us to be able to partner with a clinical trial program and be able to say, okay, hey, we're looking at this particular geography and we need Spanish speaking materials. We need to disseminate and target and mail and email materials to this particular geography for this clinical trial. That's something that we can do, but this sort of amplifies and takes us to the next level as it relates to how we can partner and outreach and accrue individuals to a clinical trial that could really maybe, I hope, save their life.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. And agree. I do agree. It's all about that partnership lens to enabling the impact based upon these real world data insights. So with each of these criteria, you can double click into it. You can actually see that geographic representation, that density. You can surface additional demographic data on those target patient cohorts that would be screening eligible for that particular trial. And then you can also get a direct sense of who they're treating HCPs, the healthcare professionals are that are seeing these patients. So that is identifiable data and information we do have access to that you can leverage for outreach. So there's a lot that can be brought to your fingertips, primarily starting at modeling with that inclusion exclusion criteria and seeing the potential impact on different racial and ethnic groups, and then being able to kind of pull that through in a deeper way with additional insights. So the next use case is around informing that site selection and investigator selection decision within clinical development. So again, you've modeled your inclusion exclusion criteria, the elements of your trial design with your clinical scientists and your clinical ops folks. Now you're in the world of actually trying to select sites. So again, we looked at that specific colorectal cancer study that's on clinicaltrials.gov. We noticed that for that particular colorectal cancer study, there were 9 active sites. At least by the time we checked, they could have more as of today or in the future, but there are 9 sites that were active and posted. The site information was there. And then we again used the real world data solutions, interrogated those sites, and actually looked for the representation of African American and white Americans across those 9 active clinical sites. And when we did that, we saw that for the cohort of patients that were screening eligible relative to what we had modeled in the previous step, only 9% of them were African American or Black Americans. 74% were white Americans. So again, there's that disparity here. So this is an insight that the sponsor company can leverage to either consider additional sites or at least understand what the implications might be in their ability to actually recruit diverse patients and patients that are disproportionately impacted by colorectal cancer disease. So we actually then looked around about a 50 to 75 mile radius based on zip codes to some of the sites that were selected. There was a site selected in Texas. We looked around that within our applications, and we actually saw there was another healthcare organization where, for the same cohort of patients that we had modeled, 50% of the patients in that healthcare organization were African American patients, and this was actually a community hospital as well. So I know there's been a lot of effort to think through sourcing patients from community hospitals, and this was one of them, and we thought that was insightful. So that could again be a source of referrals potentially, or maybe a decision to actually activate that site. Same approach we took with one of the sites that was located in New York. It was an academic site, but we also found 2 academic sites nearby where the Black American population was 40% relative to the 9% in the 9 active sites. So again, bringing these insights to your fingertips, fairly straightforward to help inform that site investigator selection decision, all with the aim of increasing the representation of patients on that specific trial. Angie, would love for any thoughts or commentary here again on the patient advocacy side.
I think this is great. One thing that when I saw this and when we started talking about this, I realized, gosh, wouldn't it be great if we were able to take this data and really work, and how do you make this actionable? So you could really look at developing a patient advisory council this way, start developing trust, developing communication strategies, work with your patient advocacy groups to say, hey, these are the sites we're looking at. If we were to adjust slightly and pull in a community hospital, is there an advocate? Is there a patient advisory representative that could participate and help build that bridge? And I think that these are the types of insights that can really be minor adjustments, but huge impact. So I think that for us as an advocacy organization, we've been able to use this data alongside our partners and both academic and industry for us looking at biomarker testing. So if we wanted to focus on biomarker testing, what are the lowest propensity testers with a high volume colorectal cancer? What are the high propensity testers with high volume colorectal cancer? Again, looking at how can we build champions, how can we build representation, and how can we target our resources and communication with these individuals. And again, I know that for many of the folks that are on this webinar that have been working on this for a really long time, it's sort of that long game. It's building that relationship, building the communication over a very long time, so that when you have a clinical trial, you have these things in place. So I think this is so exciting to be able to see.
Awesome. All right, so let's move on to the next use case. So actually accelerating the patient recruitment once the study is active. So again, gone through the process of understanding the impact through modeling the trial's inclusion exclusion criteria, understand the implications of that on potential site investigator selection. But now we're in active recruitment, and there are still opportunities here in leveraging real-world data to increase the representation of different racial and ethnic groups in recruitment. And the way we've addressed this, at least at Komodo, is there's another application or product where we pull through that cohort we just modeled into another application where then sponsors or customers are able to get real-time weekly alerts as to screening eligible patients that meet the definition of that cohort we had just created. And what's really, really key here is that, again, the treating physician, the health team, the healthcare team for that specific patient, that information is identifiable and can be leveraged for outreach. But then also we're able to pull through the race and ethnicity of those specific patients into the application as well. So as you've done a great job of maybe modeling your inclusion exclusion criteria, selecting your optimal sites. Maybe as recruitment is going, you're determining that, hey, you're low on one ethnic group versus another group, or you really want to bring up one group over the other. This is a fantastic tool to understand where screening eligible patients exist as a source of referrals into the study, and then also as a source of maybe potentially even understanding if there are other additional sites you might want to focus on targeting if you're able to expand your specific site footprint. So extremely powerful here in terms of the accuracy and the timeliness of this data, and we definitely think it's a way to accelerate the development, accelerate time in development through recruitment without necessarily compromising the ability to ensure that the representation on that trial is reflective of real-world populations. Angie, curious if any additional thoughts on this one before we jump to the next use case.
Sure. I think I go back to, and I feel like I'm a broken record, but building those relationships with patients. I think when you're starting to screen and starting to accrue in diverse populations, you don't see those numbers go up. You really need to have those established relationships so that you can say, like, what are those barriers? Boots on the ground. What are those barriers? Is it transportation? Is it getting to the clinic? Is there an opportunity to look at hybrid models for your clinical trials so that you can reduce the number of visits? And that's why it's so important, I think, early on to know who you're speaking with and who you're trying to target so you can design these trials to be optimized for patients and really be patient-centered. But that's probably something that I would add at every point and juncture of your presentation.
Awesome, fantastic. All right, cool. The last use case we wanted to talk through is around measuring long-term safety and efficacy. Um, so the reality is, again, clinical trials, randomized clinical trials, gold standard in terms of bringing so much breakthrough innovation and new drugs to market. But the reality is that those trials, they have to end. We can't live in a world where trials are continuously happening for on and on and on. And but that being said, we still need to find ways to truly assess that long-term safety and efficacy of those drugs, especially as they get into real-world settings and less of the um, controlled setting of a specific clinical trial. And we're able to do this. We're able to link clinical trial data for patients who are active on a clinical trial into some of these real-world data sources, the Komodo real-world data source, our healthcare map, um, such that after the trial, the sponsor companies, patient advocacy organizations are able to get a sense of how these patients are engaging with the healthcare system, and what are these long-term efficacy and safety of these drugs as they are administered in real world settings. And the key here is that this can all be done in a very in a privacy preserving way, such that there are no violations to any HIPAA laws, and we're able to do this in a way where we can leverage that data moving forward. This can also help inform future evidence that might be needed to be generated as we think through the life cycle of a specific drug as it once it gets into the market. So multiple use cases here in terms of being able to link in that clinical trial data with real world data sources to surface additional insights, primarily focused on assessing that long-term efficacy and safety. I'm pretty excited about this one because I definitely think it can unlock so much, and we're seeing that with some of our customers today. Angie, I know you're excited about this one as well, so we'll love we'll love your thoughts here.
I think this is so timely. I mean, being able to do this, the FDA is so engaged in the consumer engagement around drug development, and also what that looks like as far as quality of life afterwards. So I think being able to look at this, be able to better understand, I think it not only builds a better understanding of how this drug works or how this will impact a patient long term, it also builds trust with patients. I think that as a patient myself, and as someone that I've seen so many patients go through a battery of challenges on a clinical trial, and then afterwards, patients really want to better understand, what is my life going to look like after this? How will this impact my career, my life? If I live, will my quality of life be there? So I think that it's incredible to see that you're able to do this in a way that industry and academic groups can still do it in an efficient manner. It seems like this is allowing for that. So I think it's very exciting for patients to be able to see this, and then also to be able to have industry partners or trialists work with patients to ask good questions, and to be able to pick, what are those quality of life issues that we're looking at, and what are those barriers that patients are experiencing. So very exciting.
Agreed. Awesome. So again, we kind of set the stage with colorectal cancer, Fight CRC, and understanding some of the healthcare disparities there, and the challenges with recruiting diverse populations into clinical trials. We went through the exercise of actually pulling an actual trial that's actively recruiting, and showing how the real world data solutions can really influence these health equity frameworks to ensure that the patients that are on trial are truly representative of real world populations. And definitely, and so want to pass it over to you, Angie, to really talk through again how we can pull this data through insights, but ultimately to have an impact. And I think a lot of this for us at Komodo is through partnerships directly with sponsors, directly with patient advocacy organizations like yours. So would definitely love for you to provide some words there, and then we'll open this up for Q&A.
Excellent. I think that there's, couple areas that we've talked about, and I think it's been great to be able to go through these use cases, because it's everything from developing those relationships with patients, engaging patients in trial design itself, understanding and be proactive around the trial design, understand what those milestones are. And then really in the end, you pointed out, very eloquently, that what are those endpoints that we're looking at as a patient community. And so I think that what we're able to do is partner with our researchers, our scientists, and with the data to be able to look at this and inform and empower patients. So I think as much as this is going to inform clinical trial design, I think that being able to partner with advocacy groups like ours, you empower us to be able to better inform clinical trials in general and then inform the community at large. We're an advocacy organization. So, our partnership with Komodo has been really insightful as it relates to early age onset colorectal cancer, the studies that Komodo has put out as it relates to incidences being later for Black Americans, 8 days later, and those diagnosis happening at urgent cares and not in a primary care setting or a GI setting has been really insightful, because, when we take a step back and we're like, where are these patients newly diagnosed, maybe late stage colorectal cancer, where are they being diagnosed? It's really important that we understand. I would not have necessarily thought urgent care is where we needed to target our efforts. But that is what's happening. And that's what the claims data is saying. So I think that as we are thinking and dialoguing around this, it's so incredibly important that highest and best use of our resources is to really look at what's actually happening. And it's pretty incredible what the claims data is able to tell us.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Angie. Cool. So that's what we wanted to share with you all. I think at this point we love to open this up for questions. Feel free to ask in the question box, and yeah, we're here to address them.
All right. Thank you for such an informative presentation. Before we get started on the Q&A session, I'd like to remind our audience how to submit questions. You can submit questions by typing them into the Q&A box, which can be found on the right-hand side of the presentation window. All right, and our first question is, how easy is it to access RWD?
Okay, I think that I can take that one. Fortunately, pretty easy. So again, we've at Komodo, we've done the job of stitching together healthcare data across multiple sources in a longitudinal, privacy-preserving way into what we call our healthcare map. I can show that right now. Very representative of the U.S. population to the tune of, again, north of 330 million lives, comprehensive medical claims, specialty pharma claims, pharmacy claims as well. And then also we've infused that with electronic health records as well. So it's not just a claims database, even though that is the foundation. So that's the nature of the real world data. But naturally to get insights from that data, we've built software solutions on top of that, and partners like patient advocacy groups have access to that software suite. We have 4 products that are available for different use cases, and so depending on the use case, there might be one product that is better for you to consider. The product we use to actually model the inclusion exclusion criteria is called Prism. The product we use to get weekly alerts on screening eligible patients once your trial is actively recruiting is called Pulse. The product to inform site selection is Aperture. And then Sentinel is our product where we actually give sophisticated data users direct access to our patient level data for them to create their own models, maybe even create their own products relative to some of their unique their unique needs. And we're surfacing, again, value across multiple use cases in clinical development. So that's how easy it is to access the real data to really get to those insights and then partner with others to get to actual impact. Thank you.
Okay, next question. This looks like a two-parter. What are your recommendations about input from investigators who treat mostly underrepresented populations? And how is their feedback considered in the evaluation of real-world data informing key study design components, even before protocol finalization and prior to site selection?
Angie, do you want to take part of that?
Sure. Sure. No, I think that's an important one because equally important to patient advocacy voices, it's those real world community-based investigators that are trying to engage. And so I think it's sort of that same relationship. I do think it's really important to take in those that feedback because the setting for communities are so different than academics. We have a local clinical trial group here, and they have to co-op 3 hospitals together. And so those specific barriers that PIs have here are very different than what you would see at MD Anderson. So as you're thinking about, okay, how can we increase underrepresented populations and maybe geographically rural populations, I think it's really important to understand there may be different processes and your protocol may need to accommodate those processes. So I think it's a really important question. And the more you can have community physicians provide you that insight, I think the better the design is if you wanted to sort of diversify geographically and even for specific populations.
Love it. The only thing I'll add is as we kind of went through the exercise of modeling maybe inclusion exclusion criteria, definitely worth checking in with different providers, different investigators as to the specific patient journeys, because they may only have context to the patients that they've been treating. And I think some of these real world data solutions can broaden that horizon beyond the patients they may have within their setting to understand the journeys of different patients that are also impacted by that disease, and that can lead to additional insights and more importantly to impact. Thanks.
Kwame, can I add something? Because you brought up something really important that I thought was
Absolutely.
fascinating. When we partnered with Komodo on patient journeys, this is new to me on how Komodo does it. But what I thought was really interesting was that it was a flexible conversation. So when we partnered to look at a specific journey, we were able to say, working with the experts at Komodo, okay, this is what it looks like in this geographic area. We're also seeing this happen in another geographic area. And we were able to compare that. So it was really interesting to be able to work with your team and say, okay, hey, journeys are looking differently. And is that these anecdotal stories actually happening? So were we able to validate those stories? It was fascinating.
No, absolutely. I think thanks for sharing that. And I think that's where we definitely look to differentiate ourselves. We want to make sure our data is timely. We're constantly updating our healthcare map daily with new data. It's living and breathing. So journeys change. Journeys look different across different racial ethnic groups and also across geography. So having that core data set and then more importantly the software solutions to surface those insights is key.
Okay, does Komodo partner more often with pharma companies or patient orgs or others?
I'll take that. So we partner with everyone. I wouldn't necessarily say we sway more towards patient orgs or others over pharma companies. I think we're definitely mission aligned. We definitely partner and sell into pharma companies. Don't get me wrong, but our goal is to reduce the burden of disease and 100%. A lot of the innovation coming out of pharma companies is a way to do that. But we fully appreciate that there are other ways to do that with partnering with patient advocacy organizations, partnering with academia as well. We just creating an opportunity to partner with Stanford University. So it's wide and broad, and we're not swaying towards one group over the other, but really looking at this through the lens of aligning with our mission. Thanks.
Okay, the next question is, how expansive is Komodo's race ethnicity data?
How expansive is our race and ethnicity data? Pretty expensive. So we made a huge investment towards the end of last year to go after this. So we have self-identified race and ethnicity data to the tune of about 200 million lives across our healthcare map. We did a comparison of the different relative ratios of different racial and ethnic groups within that data compared to the U.S. Census Index, and we're comparable. We're representative. So very compelling source of data to help drive and frame health equity strategies. Thank you.
Okay, how do we from industry begin to work with patient advocacy groups?
I'll take that one. I think you really have to, one, understand what you're trying to do with the patient advocacy group, so that you really pick the right one. I don't think that all advocacy groups are made equal. I think some do an amazing job with patient support, and there are some that are really focused on research and advocacy. So really being thoughtful about that and what your expectations are. And I say that because not all patient advocacy groups train advocates to engage in industry sort of clinical trial development. So, and we've had challenges with industry where they're saying, oh, well, we just have a patient. And so we just find a patient and put them on our research study. And that patient really isn't equipped. And it can be a bad experience for researchers. It can also be a bad experience for that patient. And so I would really encourage, no matter what disease category you're in, is make sure that when you engage with an advocacy group, that the advocacy group actually has an investment in research advocacy so that you, one, don't have a bad experience, but also so that you know that that advocacy group can sustain a relationship focused on research. And that's a different area of expertise, I think.
Okay. Would you also share data on other underrepresented populations in addition to Black Americans?
Absolutely. Yes. So again, we have self-identified race and ethnicity to the tune of the 200 million I talked about. So that's African American, that's Asian and Pacific Islander, Native American as well, and White Americans. And then we also have ethnicity, so Hispanic or not. And again, those two are separated. And we have access to that, and definitely depending on the disease or the burden on different patients of different groups, we could surface that data, and more importantly, those insights. Yeah.
Okay, great. This appears to be the last question. What do you think the impact of decentralized methods, other innovative technologies, grassroots outreach, et cetera, on the future of health equity framework you presented today?
Yeah, I can speak to some of this, and then I don't know if Angie, if you have any thoughts. So I think it's extremely compelling. If we're able to again take steps to live in a world where there's reduction in that patient burden. Patients don't have to, come to a particular site to engage in a specific clinical trial. They can enroll in a trial from literally anywhere in the country or maybe even in the world. That definitely increases access. So I think that's a step in the right direction for us to get to. And then also just even thinking through how these technologies can help patients stay on trial, stay engaged with their disease, or stay engaged with the elements of executing that trial. I think these technologies will definitely help make these trials more accessible and generally also help increase the representation, because you're not limited to a specific geographic area. So those thoughts that come to mind for me. Angie, I don't know if you have any additional thoughts on that one.
I think it's a great question. And I think that COVID really brought to light that there are possibilities that we can adapt and adopt with these decentralized methods. And I think NCI is open to them. And I think that's something that we should push for, because I think that as we want to find ways to accrue higher numbers into clinical trial, and we want those numbers to look like our communities, we're going to have to think of innovative technologies. I think part of it is highest and best use of resources by being able to target specific communities, make good judgments on where clinical trial sites should be, but also push ourselves to go to sites that may or not be our normal sites that we always go to, and really look at, is this a good investment? So if 50% of the population is Hispanic or Black, or we have a high population of Asian Americans, maybe it is a really good investment to invest in that trial site that has never had a clinical trial, maybe, or doesn't have the volume of clinical trials that other sites have. So I think it's an incredibly important piece. I think grassroots outreach is so important. I think sharing stories of patients who look like specific patients, like share stories of Asian Americans, Black Americans, Hispanics, and can speak their language, I think is so important to building trust. And then sort of my last point on this would be, I think it's really important for us to remember, I just read a study, 50% of the population will be non-Hispanic whites by 2045. So we've got to figure out now, how do we reach populations? How are we authentically relatable? And then how do we present clinical trials to them? Because I know for colorectal cancer patients, when you're stage 3 and stage 4, it's not just one clinical trial. It's what is the sequence of clinical trials I may have to go down. And so I need to make sure all these clinical trials that I'm looking at, I'm able to access. So we really have to start thinking about how do we leverage technology to make it accessible for folks.
Okay, wonderful. So before I go through the closing comments, I just want to open it up and let you guys, if you'd like, Kwame and Angie, if you'd like to have any closing thoughts, now's the time to do so.
I'm sure I'll go first. And again, I think, health equity and pulling that strategy through clinical development is definitely multifaceted. There's a lot happening within a sponsor company, let alone at a clinical site, let alone, at the actual patient who's carrying the burden of that disease and their family. So 100% multifaceted. That being said, we definitely see a role and opportunity for rural data to begin to influence that. And more importantly, working with technology companies that have access to this data, that are committed to ensuring that this data is timely, representative, it's accurate. And I'm also committed to building the solutions to actually get to insights quicker, faster on this data, because it's all about moving up that channel to get to ultimately the impact that we all want, where we have confidence that the drugs that we're developing are actually safe and effective for all patients. So definitely think there's an opportunity for that, and we'll look to partner with the industry to enable that. So those are my parting words. Angie?
I would say this is just a very different world that we're in. When I started 15 years ago and was working in clinical trials, accessing data like this was sort of futuristic. Like maybe someday we would be able to turn big data into something actionable or an actual plan. So, I think it's really changing the advocacy community. I think it's changing what industry is doing in academic centers. But what is unique here, I think, is the accessibility of the data. So, we've worked with groups looking at data. We work with government agencies working at data, but this is a little bit different in that, FIGHT CRC has been able to take a large amount of data in colorectal cancer and not only make it actionable for us as an organization, but we've been able to make it actionable for a patient. And I think that is unheard of in our field. And now I think many organizations are looking at how can we do this. So we're very excited to be able to see something grow as it relates to patients being able to access data for their personal decision making, and be able to find opportunities to enhance their care. So I think that would be my closing remarks, but it was very nice to be a part of this discussion. Thank you, Kwame.
Oh, awesome. It was great to continue to partner with you. Excited.
Wonderful. Great job. Thanks, Kwame and Angie. So I want to thank the audience as well for attending and for participating in today's event. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, Komodo Health, for making today's educational webcast possible. We'd like to ask everyone in the audience to participate in a brief survey. You can see the survey to the right of your screen. You will also receive an email alerting you when this webcast will be available for replay. We invite you to forward that announcement to your colleagues who may have missed today's live event. Thank you all for joining, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.